storm that ripped through. I didn't even know it was coming. And we still have there in areas where I live, the area where I live, there's still like these gigantic trees down. Some of the roads near where I live, you can't even get past. So they're still trying to take care of all that. But I really appreciate you bearing with me and apologize for getting knocked off the call. We lost power for like 24 hours. So when you're relying on Netflix to kind of keep you entertained at night, that was a rough blow. But I remember last time I had raised the issue of sort of the idea, especially now, what you would be willing to swear to this solemn promise that you would be willing to make to your teammates and to your coaching staff. And I don't know if any of you have talked about it or given it any thought, but I've continued to think about it. And, one of the things when I think back on when I played a million years ago and when Coach Blakeney played, Coach Thornton, it was a question of choice, really, that I think any player has to take ownership in the program. And think about it this way. Like, look, your coaches are all in on this endeavor, but they, unless I'm mistaken, like, not all your coaches went to Howard. It's your school. They're the caretakers of the program, but it's your program. And accepting responsibility for that and ownership of that, I think, is an important thing to wrap your head around. That this is something that is going to be with you and be what I would call an asset for the rest of your life. And any asset that you have, you want to take care of and make it the best that it can be. And so that requires choices, and it requires a choice to be committed to what you're doing, committed to your teammates, committed to your program, committed to your coaches, committed to to that logo that you have and what you wear on your chest, that Howard that you wear on your chest. That's a choice, and belief is a choice, and trust is a choice. So I think you have to make that decision. I am choosing to believe. I'm choosing to believe that what my coaches tell me is the truth, that what my teammates are telling me is the truth. Those are choices that you have to make. And I believe your attitude is a choice. And, no team and no individual has ever accomplished anything great without an attitude that matches that. And discipline is a choice as well. When I was a player, our coach defined discipline as doing the right thing at the right time to the best of your ability. So, it's not punishment. It's doing the right thing at the right time to the best of your ability. And I think those are conscious choices that you make. And, it's funny, when I look back on my time as a player, I don't have a ton of regrets. But one thing that I do regret, like I feel like I was a really hard worker. And if I mentioned this to you before we got cut off, I'm sorry about that, but let me repeat it and hopefully expound upon it just a little bit. I was a really hard worker as a player. Like, I put my time in, and I put what I considered to be a lot of effort into it. I was early to practice, early to the weight room. I did my best to bust my tail to do what I was supposed to do. But when I look back on it and being completely honest and assessing, sort of how I approached it and what my performance was, I think when I was in pre-practice, when I walked into the building and I was in the locker room getting dressed for practice and walking out on the floor and doing all my pre-practice work, individual work, things like that. One of the things I regret is that I wasn't more productive in that time of mentally preparing myself for practice. And I think I was prepared to play every day, but I'm not sure that every day I was ready for a fight. And I'm not sure every day that I had prepared myself mentally to compete all the way through practice, every drill, everything that we did. And I think that can be the difference between winner and champion. It's certainly the difference between average and winner. But I think it's the difference also between winner and champion. And a lot of players are winners, and a lot of programs are winners. Not a lot are champions, and not a lot build a championship culture that's sustainable over time. And you do that through how you approach your work, and how you approach sort of practice and your preparation. And I think you may have heard this, but I think it's worth repeating. You are not unique in wanting to win. Everybody wants to win. Everybody. They all want to win. What separates players and what separates teams, in my view, and I think in the view of a lot of people that have been around the game a long time, is those that are willing to prepare to win, that are willing to do what's necessary leading up to your opportunity to win. And that's the separating factor, because that's where you find out who's really tough and who's not. And if anyone believes that you can switch toughness on and off, you cannot. You're not going to just be tough the day of the game or at tip. It doesn't. I don't believe it works that way. I think the toughest teams and the toughest players are the ones who are tough enough to prepare and to immerse themselves in what it takes to win, not just wanting to win. Doing what it takes to win is an expression or a byproduct of wanting to win. You can't do that without wanting to win first, but wanting to win just isn't enough. Wanting to win is easy. It's the prep. It's kind of like I can't remember who was. We were talking a little bit before. Was it Isaac? I can't remember whose sister is going to be is starting a residency. Well, it's one thing to say, well, I want to be a doctor. It's another thing to say that I'm going to do the work it takes to be a doctor, the preparation it takes to be a doctor. I mean, those are two very different things. And so I want to win. Yeah, well, that's great. But I'm willing and I will prepare to win. And you guys do that collectively. And those are issues of choice as well. And it's a choice that you make every day, and it has to be renewed every day. Like, what good does it do to, one day be prepared for practice, another day not? Because that's going to lead you to inconsistent results. If you want consistent championship level of performance, you have to have consistent championship preparation. And that's true in anything. It's not just a basketball thing. That's true in your academic life. It is going to be true in your family life. It will be true if you go on and have a job in it. Like I'm a lawyer, and I also work in broadcasting. I don't just show up to games and say what I see. I am diligent in preparing. I'm not saying I'm the most diligent. I have no idea, but I know I'm diligent in how I prepare. And as a lawyer, I put a lot of work in, and I was very diligent when I was practicing full time in being as prepared as possible when I stepped into a courtroom, into a deposition, into anything that I did. Because I knew that was the only way that I could perform at the highest level. And that's true of basketball. Now the difference is, and this is where things are different in basketball. In basketball, you have an opponent, and it's somebody who's trying. You have an opponent trying to stop you from doing what you want to do. Now in other sports, like in golf, golfers don't have opponents. They have competition, but they don't have opponents. There's nobody that's stopping Tiger Woods from executing what he wants to execute. Nobody's standing in his way, making it difficult for him to hit a shot, or physically, bumping him off his ability to get to the ball. That's not happening. In basketball, you have that. And I think it requires even more. It requires even more preparation, and it requires even more concentration as you are moving toward the competition. And it requires more togetherness. And the truth is, togetherness is a choice, and it's a choice that all of you have to make. And if you have complete togetherness, you will be really hard to beat. But if you have the majority of your team that's together and a few players that are not, that that can be like an anchor around your team's neck. And that's why it's important. That's why I asked about the oath, and just the idea of what would you be willing to promise to your teammates and to your team, because all of you are important. All of you play really important roles. Now, all of you are not star players, and that was true of me. I was not a star player when I was in college, but my task was to be a star in my role. And as you guys probably know, your role is not who you are. Your role is what your team is asking you to do in order to be a champion and be the best team that you can be. It's not a limit on you, because there are going to be times when if you have a certain role that you're going to be you're in certain games, maybe for a season, maybe half a season, I don't know, you may have to break out of that role. So you want to prepare yourself for to be the as good of a player and as skilled as you can be any area. But just because you're playing a role doesn't mean at another time you're not going to be asked to bust out of that role. So you don't want to prepare just for that role. You want to be able to go beyond it. But you also don't want to. You have to accept the role. I think the great teams, the truly great teams, are the ones where all players are great teammates, that they're easy to play with and they're hard to play against. And they go to practice every day and they compete against one another and with one another. But it's okay to compete against your teammates in practice. You guys are going to, through portions of practice, you're going to be in it together, but you're going to have different colored jerseys on in practice. And man, it is okay to fight tooth and nail against your teammates when it's time to compete. But here's where what I think is important in that is when your coaching staff makes a decision as to that competition, and they decide, all right, here's the group that's going to be on the floor to start the game. Here's the group that's going to play here, whatever it is, whatever the decision is. I think you have to be tough enough as a player and as a person to be able to accept that decision and to unite with your fellow teammates and move forward together with that decision. Because I'll tell you one thing, what is amazing about basketball is coaches make decisions with regard to what players play at a given time, but those decisions aren't final. They're not. They can change at any time. And what's great is, like, the next day at practice, prove that you deserve more. Prove yourself. Proving yourself is an everyday thing. And I think that's great. That doesn't mean, like, if you have a bad day, you're tossed out. I'm not suggesting that, but that's an awesome part about competition, is it's new every day. And you have opportunities to continue to prove yourself, to continue to get better. And so being persistent as a teammate and persistent as a competitor is really a great quality for any team to have, that we are persistent. We keep plugging. Like, we don't give up. And we don't give up in our practices. We don't give up in our games. If we get knocked on our tail, we are going to get up and fight. And if I get knocked on my tail, I'm going to get up and I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep competing. So that's the one thing I really sort of regret, is that it took me a while to figure out that I needed to be more diligent in mentally preparing myself to compete every day and to fight every day, because that's what the games are. Games are fights, and there's a difference between being prepared to play and being prepared to fight. At least I think there's a huge difference. And I think once you commit to that and concentrate on it, you can really make positive strides toward being even better. And I'll say one last thing, and then we can open it up for questions. I know coaches and players, they talk a lot about toughness, and I've been one of those. When I was a young player, I heard a lot about it. It was talked about, but it was never really defined. And I felt like I exhibited it, exhibited toughness, maybe not as much as I should have, or not as much as looking back I wanted to. But I get asked a lot who the toughest player I played against was, and I think people expect me to say, well, Michael Jordan or Len Bias or guys like Ralph Sampson, guys like that, and they were incredibly tough competitors. But uh, I have always said that the toughest player I ever played against was a guy I played against in Italy. I played in Europe professionally for a few years, and I played against a guy named John Ebeling when I was playing in Italy professionally. And John Ebeling went to Florida Southern University. It was a Division II school, and he was a Division II All-American. And to be quite honest with you, I had never heard of him before I played against him the first time. And he was about my size, 6'7". We were similar athletes. I think actually I was a better athlete than he was. But after I played against him, I didn't want any part of that guy. He was relentless, and he was relentless in areas of the game. It wasn't like he could jump over me, or he was so much stronger than me he could overpower me, or he was faster than me. Nothing like that. It was like a mirror. It was like looking in a mirror as far as what he could do. But he was so hard to play against because he did everything that I could do. But to be completely honest, he did things I could do that I was unwilling to do for as long as he would do them. And and I'm not exaggerating here, he ran the floor hard every time. Every time that you had to run, he ran hard. Every time a shot went up, he put his body on you. Every time you ran across the lane, he was there, body on body. He made every catch really difficult. He was always moving, so he was really hard to guard. And he's hard to block out because he wouldn't surrender to the first hit. He kept coming, and after a while, that kind of mentally wears you out. And he wore me out. And I don't have any problem saying that, because I admired that, and it taught me a great lesson, because I hoped I would have learned it to that level before. But he never quit on anything. And so you ask yourself, why am I not doing that? And I endeavored to do it at a higher level after I played against him. That's how much it inspired me. And I think that's a question that you should ask yourself basically every practice. Was I a good teammate? Was I a tough player? And that is pretty simple. Was I easy to play with? Did I make my teammates' jobs easier? Was I aware of what they were going through, and aware of what was going on, so I could help? Did I talk? Did I do all those? And then, was I hard to play against? Did I make my counterpart? Was that guy, that player, saying, "Man, I don't want to play against him again"? Um, it's pretty simple in concept, but it's difficult to do. But that's what you play for, is so you can accomplish the difficult things. Like, nobody gets a trophy for doing the easy stuff. You get a trophy for doing the hard stuff, and the hard stuff is what's rewarding. And I had a baseball coach, a high school baseball coach, that used to say, having fun is doing hard things well. And I've always thought about that. That was fun. Now, it doesn't mean you were laughing all the way through practice, but there's a feeling of accomplishment that you guys have and will have together, that you're not going to be able to get in any other endeavor you have in your life right now. And that's what makes this great. And if you continue to sort of strive together for your common goals and objectives, you will build something that you will always be proud of, and you'll always be able to come back. And then you'll have classes that come after you, and teams that come after you at Howard, that'll build on what you did. And I promise you'll take a tremendous amount of pride in that, and it'll be worth every ounce of effort that you put into it, because of I don't ever regret anything that I gave to my team. Not one thing. I don't ever regret anything I did. The only regrets I have were what I failed to do, maybe what I didn't give, and that's a profound difference, and it's a deep feeling that you have. Like regret sucks, and I don't have a lot of them, but I have a couple of those with sort of if I would have done this at a higher level, my preparation and all the stuff we've just talked about, that I would have achieved more and had an even better outcome. And if you guys have any questions, if there's anything I can help you with, but more than anything, um, all I really wanted to do when Coach Blakeney asked me about this was to, share a couple thoughts with you so that maybe all of you could talk together and maybe ask yourself the right questions. And because, you guys all want to do your best and achieve your best outcome. And I know, I listened to some of the things that Grant Hill told you. You're not gonna find better people than Grant Hill or Kenny Blakeney, all the guys that you have in your lives. And I know Grant mentioned to you the idea of no excuses, sort of being honest. And no excuses, all that means is being honest with yourself. Like, don't rationalize stuff. Just be honest with yourself first, and honest with your teammates and your coaches, and you'll go a long way. You'll reach the right place, because most people are not honest with themselves. They rationalize things. They blame other people. They make excuses, so they don't have to face that. Well, wait a minute. I need to do more. I failed here. Whatever it is, like failing doesn't make you a failure. It makes you a competitor. The failures are the ones that have a negative outcome, and they don't keep at it. And they make excuses and they rationalize. Competitive, just because you compete and fall down doesn't mean you're a failure. That just means you're a competitor. Everybody's gonna get knocked on their tail, but it's the ones that get up and fight together that become winners and champions. But if you have any questions, fire away. I'd be more than happy to tell you what I think, and I'll be as honest as I can with you.
I have one. I remember when last time you were on before you got knocked off, you had mentioned how, you as a freshman, you played under Coach K. It was his second year. I think you said 1982. That was your freshman year. And I was wondering, and it's not the same exact situation, but in terms of just bringing a new team together with a new coach, how do you, because I understand when you said making a promise with your teammates or having an agreement with your teammates, but in terms of really building chemistry with your teammates instead of just, having this agreement, but you actually get to know people, or in terms of fighting each other on the court, how we, kind of mesh together, what would you say, even personality wise? So what would you say is a good way to kind of do that and do it efficiently? Because I know I don't want to be one of those teams who get together and it takes us a whole season to or at the end of the season, we kind of find our groove as a team. So what would you say would help, not rush that process, but do it as efficiently as we can so we can be great, earlier rather than later?
Well, that's a great question. I think sort of on the chemistry front, how you get along on and off the court is really important in that. But the time that you spend, you have to put your time in. So whether you're at a team meal, whether you are on a bus or an airplane, think about how many times you have to get together and communicate and to have quality time. There are a ton of them. So, are you going to spend your time, into yourself? And I don't mean to cast aspersions on anybody, doing a certain thing, but say, I used to listen to, back then they called them Walkmans, now they're AirPods and all that stuff, but I used to listen to a lot of music, and you'd be on the bus and stuff like that. So I think if I had it to do over again, I'd probably spend less time doing that and more time talking to my teammates, when we're in those situations, so that you had that ability to find out and be aware of what your teammates are going through, have empathy for your teammates, because not all of you are going to be going through the exact same thing at the exact same time. You're gonna be on the same bus, but you're not all going to be taking the exact same trip. So maybe one of you is coming off an injury. Maybe another one is not playing as well for whatever reason, or has some things going on off the court. Well, how are you going to help your teammates if you don't know what they're going through and you're not communicating off the floor? And on the floor, it's the same sort of thing of walking the line of being encouraging and supportive, but at the same time having high expectations and holding each other accountable to doing things to the best of your ability. Like when you hear people talk about accountability, a lot of times it winds up sounding like blame. Like, this person needs to be held accountable. Well, I mean, that means they're trying to blame them for something. But to me, accountability means that you're all going to live up to a certain standard. And when one or more of your teammates is not living up to that standard, well, the rest of you have an obligation to point that out to them so that they can do that. Not just to get on them and have it be negative, although it can be, and still be, you can approach it, with what you're not doing and to have a positive result. But you've got to have the courage to be able to address that, and the toughness to be able to address it. And then whoever's hearing it has to be tough enough to hear it and act positively on it. Because, look, we've all been on teams before where you've seen the dynamic of somebody, there's a defensive mistake and somebody says, hey man, you got to pick that guy up. And then he says, well, what you got to do, and then it turns into an argument instead of taking the criticism constructively and acting on it. So what I would say is it all comes down, like, I think it comes down to communication, your ability to communicate on and off the floor, and to take advantage of opportunities to communicate. Doc Rivers said something, the coach of the Clippers said something I was at a clinic several years ago, and he spoke, and he was talking about communication. And he said that he had been studying football, and he thought it's amazing in football that they can, as soon as the ball snapped, everybody, they're so precise. And like, why can't we be more precise in basketball with what we're doing? And he had said that sort of the simple response was, well, they have huddles. They have a break in between plays and they have a chance to communicate together. Now, I think it's more than that. There are other reasons, but he had gone back and done some research in basketball and started watching film and looked at all the stop actions in a game. All right. So all the times, whether it's a free throw, ball goes out of bounds, it's got to be inbounded, timeout, whatever it is, all the times where there's a stop action in a game, and which are opportunities where there's nothing going on the floor, and it's an opportunity for the team to communicate and to get on the same page. And so when there is a whistle or some sort of stop action, does your team go in 5 different directions, or do you guys come together and communicate as to what's coming next, so that you can be on the same page? When you're on the bench, when you come out of the game, are you able to communicate with your teammates on the bench? Here's what's going on, all that stuff, that you're able to take advantage of those opportunities. And so I think that's really helpful, and it's helpful in practice. The best teams are the loudest teams. And I can usually tell when I go to a lot of practices and I see a lot of different teams. Usually I can hear how good the team is. And that what I hear will usually, not always, but usually reflect how good that team is. That the louder they are in practice, how they communicate on the floor, how they relate to one another off the floor, is in direct relation to how good they are. And I hope that answers the question, but that's sort of the way I see it from my seat.
Yeah, you answered it. Appreciate it.
Guys got a smart group. I would never ask a question either. It's the best way to get off the call.
I got a question in regards to like complacency and trying to keep yourself motivated, I guess you would say, because you had mentioned earlier, get into the weight room early, get into practice early, and doing that often. Like, obviously, that's a hard task to do throughout the whole year. So, what would you say like helped keep you motivated and in that grind throughout the entire season?
That's a good question. Like I didn't look at it as complacency, not to sort of parse words, but it's just an issue of being higher level. Like I wanted to do it at the highest level, not just put my time in. I wanted to get the most out of the time and be more productive and all that. So I mean, here's what I think on motivation. Like you guys are motivated. You're motivated people and motivated players. Otherwise, you wouldn't be at this level. Um, I think the difference though is can you like what does it take for you to be inspired? Like you're motivated. I mean, you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't motivated. You wouldn't be doing the things you're doing. But where we can really do our best work have our best performance is when we're inspired to do it. And you guys can inspire one another, and that's where I think your team leadership is really important. That and your coaches are incredibly important, but from my seat, coach directed teams are only going to be so good and they're only going to go so far. The best teams and the best programs are player led in addition to the coach leadership you get from your coaching staff. That you have to have not buy-in, because what the term buy-in is used a lot. Well, let me tell you something. Like what you want out of this is not for sale. You cannot buy it. It is not for sale. It has to be taken. Like you have to go out and earn it. And I mean, you've earned a great deal to this point, but what you want out of what you're doing now, you cannot buy. Like so when people say buy-in, nothing to buy. What you need is to inspire one another to do like your very best and to do your very best all the time. And that'll lead you to outcomes, including pushing your limits. Like I'll give you an example. So when I was a player at Duke, we used to have to run the mile every year for time. And if it's one thing I did not enjoy, it was running distances for time. Like I kind of like that the court was only 94 feet. I could run that and go do it all, do it as long as I needed to. I just did not enjoy distance running. So after my first couple years, I just kind of wasn't happy with the time I was running, and so I really worked really hard my junior year because I wanted to bust it and really run a great time in the mile. And so I really trained for it. And so when it came time to run in the mile, my junior year, my college roommate, another guy like John Ebeling, he was a much better player than I was. He's an All-American and one of the best players ever at Duke, named Mark Allery. So he was 6'8". We were similar athletically. So we ran the mile, and here I did all this training, and I ran a good time. I ran like a 5:28 or something like that. And that was a good time. Well, Allery ran a 5:11, and I was pissed at the end of that. And I actually said something to him later on. I was like, "How? Like, I trained really hard for this, and you smoked me." And he very matter-of-factly said something to me. He said, "Well, the mile isn't really about the training. It's about how much pain you're willing to endure." And I started thinking about it, going, that was true. Like he was willing to endure more pain than I was. And that was like, so here I thought, all the work that I had put in entitled me to run a good time. And it didn't. He outdid me because he was willing to endure more pain than I was. And that was inspiring to me, to work harder and to do a better job. And you guys can have that kind of effect on one another. Somebody on your team has got their A game every day. somebody's got it. When you're working out, when you're playing, whatever you're doing, somebody's got their A game, and it's their responsibility to pick up everybody's level if somebody doesn't. So I think that's important. Is you guys need to lead and inspire one another to do, because your coaches are not with you all the time. They're just not. And so how do you police one another? How do you set your standard when your coaches aren't looking over you, watching over you? That's got to be a player-led thing. And you'll be amazed. I mean, you probably already know it, but you'll be amazed how well you're going to do if that's your standard. That if sort of you're willing to go the extra mile, you're willing to inspire one another, give that relentless effort, and you're gonna enforce your standards with one another when the coaches aren't around. That's when you got a big time program.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure, Wayne.
You brought up the part about how you guys had so many battles in practice and it was okay to battle your teammates and all of that. But how would you prepare mentally for practice, maybe after having like a long day at school with classes and having the late night practices? How did you find it in you to fight through and play your best in practice?
That's a great question. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, sort of with sort of my regret was I wish that I had taken more time in those situations to mentally prepare myself that okay, I'm tired. Look what I had all day today, or I didn't get any sleep last night. Well, I don't mean to be flippant about this, but at the end of the day, tough. So what? Like it doesn't matter. Practice starts at 7:00. I got to be ready to fight at 7:00. Nobody cares what I've been through. And just like you don't care what your opponents have been through. Like when you look at, all of your games are going to be recorded in a history book, all of them. They're going to have your box score. They're going to have the results. They're going to have, how many minutes you played, how many shots you took, how many rebounds you got, how many fouls, all that stuff. Nowhere is it noted all you had to endure to get to the game. Nobody cares. Like nobody cares. And the truth is, in 20 years, you're probably not going to remember all that crap. So you got to learn and condition yourself to put that behind you and push it aside in order to get the job done. And I don't know if we had a chance to talk about this when we were together last time before the storm, kind of took me out. But let me make this analogy or give you this example. If you have surgery scheduled and you're going to get your knee operated on, and the surgical team that's doing your operation had a rough day. They had a bunch of surgeries earlier that day, and they're tired, and man, they've had a lot going on, and there's a lot going on at the hospital. I mean, do you care? You care about your operation. So you want them focused and all in on what they're doing right then. And do you care that maybe some members of the surgical team are not happy with their roles? Like they think they should be the lead surgeon, or they think they should be doing more. Why do I have to hold the suction? Like I prepared the same way as the other doctor. You don't care about that. You want their best effort, and you want them focused solely on your outcome. And why is that any different for your team? When you guys get on an airplane, do you think that do you care whether the pilot has had a rough day, or whether the cockpit crew whether they're happy with their roles, whether the co-pilot is going, I should be running this flight? You're not. You want them focused on getting that plane safely to its destination. And same thing with your thing, with what you're doing. Like what you're doing is important, and your role is important. Like, so you need to be a star in your role. And whatever happened that leading up to practice, I mean, not to be flippant about it or to diminish it, but it doesn't matter. Once practice starts, There's nothing you can do about all that. So you have to do your best. I'm not talking about being injured or anything like that, but tired. Like, and the truth is, if for any championship team, the games are going to be decided and championships are going to be decided when you're tired. At the end, when you've played a hellacious game, you may have foul trouble, you may be banged up and injured, you may be tired. That's when games are decided. So I think you really have to ask yourself, you know, how do I perform? Like, you're not going to be right all the time. You're not going to be in the best possible shape all the time, or conditioned to play your best all the time, but you're going to have to fight through that. And because it doesn't say in any of these books, like, boy, they were really tired, but they won, or they lost because they were tired. It doesn't work that way. And so I hope that answers it. I probably went on too long about it, but you just have to put that aside and concentrate on how you can best perform, and be prepared to fight.
Yeah, you answered it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick question. Like, if you remember your schedule, like, or your daily schedule, like, what exactly was it when it comes to like basketball and classes and everything?
Yeah, my daily schedule, it differed a bit, but Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I probably had 3 classes that were less than an hour in length, probably 50-minute classes. And then Tuesday, Thursday, you had a class or 2 that was an hour 15, hour 30. So I had class almost every day until I was a senior. And then I had classes maybe 3 or 4 of the 5 days of the week. Usually we had practice around 3 o'clock, not always, but usually. So I tried to get up at the same time every morning. The one thing that differs, I think now, as opposed to when I played, is we were not as conscious of nutrition as you are now, which is great for you, and something I wish we would have had. The other thing that I was not as good about was I don't think we were as in tune as you guys are on the importance of recovery and sleep. The best thing that you can do for your performance, both on and off the floor, is get appropriate sleep. And you think sometimes because you're young that doesn't apply to you. It does. You need to get sleep. And so that, the truth is, that goes to your schedule, and taking care of your body and getting the appropriate rest and recovery, sleep, it has to be one of your priorities. And if you want to be really good at what you're doing, so the best student you can be and the best player and best teammate you can be, you have to have those as your top priorities, which means you're going to have to learn an important word. And that word, if you don't know it already, and that word is no. No is a word that tough people use. And and think of it this way, when you say no to something that's not a priority, what you're really doing is saying yes to your priorities. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, just an example, I don't even know, I'm making it up, but somebody says, hey, you want to go out tonight? And you're like, I got practice tomorrow, I got an exam coming up, I got a game on Saturday, I need to get my rest. So my priority is my rest. Look, you may not want to say no to the party going out, but if you say no to that, what you're also saying, you're saying yes to your priorities, yes to your teammates, yes to what you believe is important. And I can tell you that I wish that I had used that word more often when I was in college. I used it later on more often when I got older and more mature. But saying no to things that are not your top priorities is an important form of discipline. Sort of discipline, doing the right thing at the right time to the best of your ability. Sometimes the right thing is sleeping, and that is not like somehow saying, well, I'm not doing everything I can because I'm getting sleep. Not baloney. Like, sleep is important, and if you're not getting it, your performance is going to suffer, both in the classroom and on the floor.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I have a question. We kind of talked about this last week with somebody else, but it'd be really interesting to get your perspective with the name, image, and likeness being passed and for the spring of 21, and how that kind of will shift college basketball. And then what do you think are some legal issues that might arise, if there are any, with your background as a lawyer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think my perspective is that I think athletes should be allowed the same economic rights as literally everyone else. So the NCAA, the collection of schools together, should not limit what athletes can earn or accept in the marketplace. Now, if just because we're talking about Howard, if Howard University says, well, we don't want our athletes to use their name, image, and likeness to benefit monetarily, well, that's a decision that an individual competitor in the marketplace can make. And then the players can decide, well, I don't like that, so I'm going to choose another market competitor. And I think it's the same. Like, I look at money the same way as I look at playing time. I think, nobody's telling you how many minutes your players should play. And you all get along, even though some players play more minutes, some players get more shots, some players get more attention. Some players are going to make more money. That's the way the world works. I don't have a problem with any of that stuff. I think people, especially athletes, understand meritocracy. As far as the legal issues, but again, I think those are all issues that each university, they're decisions that each university should make. Just like each university decides there's no limit on what university presidents can earn. So Howard makes a decision. Here's what we're willing to pay our university president. Somebody else is willing to pay more. Here's what we're paying our football coach. Alabama is willing to pay more. That's a market-based decision. As to the legal issues of it, I don't think there'll be major legal issues for competitors. I think the issue will be the NCAA. Like, the NCAA has staked out a position by saying, we should be allowed to limit our players and essentially violate federal antitrust law, which they've been found to do with all these restrictions, because we believe in amateurism. And we believe that if a player makes $1 off of their name, image, and likeness, they are a pro. Well, now the NCAA is saying, well, we think it's okay as long as we can control it. So they're basically saying, we really didn't believe in amateurism. We are okay with them being pros, but only to this level. I think they're going to have a problem with that. And I think if this is allowed, then I think they're going to be facing a court challenge of people of cases where the theory is, you said that any commercial makes them pros. Well, then why should they be disallowed anything now? I think that's where it'll head. But who knows? Like, I'm skeptical that the NCAA is going to allow this. I think what they're doing is floating this, and they're trying to get an antitrust exemption from Congress, which basically says, okay, we'll allow this, but you have to give us an exemption so we can disallow anything but this. And if they don't get that exemption, they're not going to allow anything. But we'll see what happens. But I think I think what's been shown here, Jake, is that they're all the things that have been said in the past about commitment to amateurism and it being a bedrock principle, that's proven now to have been a lie. That they really didn't believe in it. It was just they wanted to keep the money out of the players' hands and keep it for themselves. And I don't mean that in a craven way, but how do you have such an about face in such a short period of time, when you had the O'Bannon case and the Jenkins case in the Ninth Circuit out in California? You're saying, nope, commercial makes them pro, and you do a commercial, you're a shill for a product. And then all of a sudden now we've got these recommendations that the Board of Governors has signed off on, saying, nope, it's okay, we're good with it. That's pretty big about face, and it shows they didn't really have any principle in the matter, in my view.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, guys, it sounds like you don't have more questions. If anybody's got another one, speak now. But let me finish by saying that I am a huge admirer. I've known Coach Blakeney since he was a player in college, and you guys are really fortunate, and you'll never have another time like this in your life where you're not only sort of living with your teammates and you're all together like this, but where you've got a staff of people that are dedicated to making you better. You'll never have another time like this, and so I'm sure you appreciate it. And by appreciate, I don't mean dropping on your knees in gratitude. I mean understanding what you have, because I think if you appreciate it, meaning understand it, you have a better opportunity to take full advantage of it. And I think you will. I think you'll take full advantage of it, and I think you're going to have a great year. I'm sorry you're having to go through all this COVID-19 stuff. I can't imagine how difficult this is, and given the priorities that you have and what you're trying to accomplish. But keep plugging, and I'm not just saying this. If there's anything I can do for you guys in the future, don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll do whatever I can to help you.